property is supposed to be classified on its primary use. So the only reason for a change would be that the assessor would decide that the primary use of the property is residential. Now, if the actual use hasn't changed, then I think what the assessor is saying is that, look, we've had you at agricultural before. We think the primary use of this land is residential, so it shouldn't have been agricultural all along. We're just kind of becoming aware of this now, or we've just made up our mind or changed our mind now, something like that. So now we're going to make the change. It's always supposed to be based on primary use of the property. Question in the back?
This lady that was talking about the 40 acres with the buildings, I had an example of what she is talking about exactly. The buildings were very old, and I was told that if those buildings weren't on there, then they would not be taxed. So I should get rid of the buildings. So I got the bulldozer in there and bulldozed down these buildings. And then they said, well, it's going to take 18 months or something before that's going to affect your taxes. Well, now what I'm hearing you say is that it really didn't make any difference whether I took those buildings down or left them stand. Please explain a little more in detail.
Whether those buildings were standing or demolished had no impact on the total value of ag land in the county. It could very well have an impact on the ag land on your property, because with the buildings there, they're assigned a part of the value. They're assigned a part of the county's ag value. If the buildings are gone, they wouldn't get that value anymore. So, I mean, whether they're there or not affects the value of your particular property, but it does not affect the total value of property in the county. So if the buildings are gone, and say, I don't know, pick a number. Say the buildings are worth $100,000, and all of a sudden they're gone. Your assessment should go down by $100,000 once it works its way through the process. But the value of ag land in the rest of the county as a whole will go up by $100,000. So you and the rest of the farmers in the county that have land will each see, somewhat of a really minor increase in your land value to offset that lost building value. Anytime a building is built, that takes value off of the ag land. Anytime a building is demolished, that adds value back onto the ag land. If the buildings were old and in such bad shape, they probably shouldn't have had much value assigned to them anyway, but that's a different issue, I guess. Okay, right here.
Let me get this turned on. Okay, I got it turned on. The question's on equalization.
Mm-hmm.
Equalization seems to be the element most affecting the assessed value of my property as far as fluctuation. And I understood what you said, and I understood the application. I did not understand the elements that are used to drive that decision to, and as I understand, to increase the valuation, that I will never see a decline in that evaluation as a result of the equalization. What elements are used, and how do you arrive at that conclusion of what the equalization rate is? And if my property, the property value in the state goes down, will the equalization decline and my assessed valuation go down? A lot of questions.
The equalization, you're talking about a home, for example? Okay, we'll say home. That'll make things easier. The equalization value is based really on two things. One is the Department of Revenue does a study where they get a sample of homes in Burlington County, and they'll do their own. They'll look at the sales for those homes, a sample of homes that have sold in the past year or 2 years, because it's only assessed every other year. So they'll get a sample of sales of homes in Des Moines County. I think I said Burlington County. Over the past 2 years. They'll compare the sales data to what the assessed value of the home was. So say the home sold for $100,000, but it was only assessed for $90,000. If that was the average, then that study would indicate that the homes are underassessed by 10%. So the Department of Revenue would issue an equalization order of 10%. Now, the other factor is what the assessor does. Counties that get an equalization order where their residential value is increased 10%, they're not being treated unfairly as compared to other taxpayers in other counties. It's just that in the other counties, the assessor was more accurate in doing the assessment. The combination of the assessor's job and the equalization order is supposed to get everybody to 100% or within a plus or minus 5%. In a lot of counties, the assessment is enough to get you there, and there will be no equalization order. Occasionally, it's not. You might have some assessors that either don't have the manpower to go out there and do a comprehensive reassessment that's necessary to get the values accurate on an every other year basis. So then that's kind of the job of the equalization order, to come in and kind of be the backup person to get the assessed values where they're supposed to be. So those are the factors.
Well, you said the only factor I've heard you say thus far is the value of houses that were built recently or sold recently. I haven't heard any other elements. I understand there are more than one.
Well, the value of houses that have sold recently and then compared to the value that the assessor put on them. So the sales price compared to what the assessed value had been. Those are the two factors that go into the equalization order.
Never at any time is revenue requirements factored into that equalization formula.
No, the assessor and the Department of Revenue don't set the tax rates, they don't collect the tax rates, they're not directed by the Board of Supervisors or the City Council on what to do. In fact, they're, in the assessor's case, they're appointed by a group of organizations, city, county, school board, so they're not solely accountable to the Board of Supervisors. No, the assessor's job and the Department of Revenue's job is to set accurate values, and that's it.
If the assessed value now of homes goes down, then we can expect the equalization to also take our evaluation down. Is that a correct assumption?
Either the assessor should reduce the value, or if the assessor does not, the equalization order should. Yes. Did we get them all? Okay. There'll be plenty of time for more as we keep going. Let's move on to determining taxable values. The first thing to talk about here is the rollback. And the rollback is a state law that says the taxable value of a class of property statewide, the total taxable value, cannot increase by more than 4% each year. And here we're only talking about inflationary increase. Forget about new construction, remodelings, readditions, forget about all that for a second. The total inflationary increase in the taxable value of, say, residential property cannot increase more than 4% each year. So, when you've got a housing market that grows by 10% in a given year, you've got assessed value that'll grow 10%. The rollback says taxable value can only grow 4%. And so when we have that situation, then the rollback comes into play. We're going to go through a couple of examples here in a second that'll hopefully solidify this a little bit. Now, residential property has the biggest rollback right now, but this 4% limit applies to residential, it applies to commercial, it applies to agricultural, it even applies to industrial. They all have the potential to have a rollback, but residential is the one that's had the biggest so far, because the housing market, since this system was implemented in the late 1970s, has grown at a much higher rate than 4% annually. And the last thing to mention before we get into examples is that the rollback is calculated on a statewide basis. The Department of Revenue is going to look at assessed values over the entire state and how much those increased from 2008 to 2009. If it's more than 4%, then they're going to have to roll back the taxable value to not exceed that 4% cap. And this can really hurt counties that aren't seeing a lot of growth in their